case materials, came up in his mind with what he's supposed to be looking for. And although he kept saying, the facts are what the facts are, to admit repeatedly towards the end of the day, when asked to summarize what led him to come to his opinion, and the first words out of his mouth were Karen's interviews, that's not science. When asked to summarize what led him to come to his opinion, and the first words out of his mouth were Karen's interviews, and the first words out of his mouth were Karen's interviews, and the first words out of his mouth were Karen's interviews.
Based on your analysis, data available, reviews, study, based on the fact that you are an accident reconstructionist and a biomedical engineer, have you reached an opinion to a reasonable degree of engineering certainty whether the defendant's Lexus struck Mr. John O'Keefe on January 29, 2022, around 12:32 a.m.?
Yes.
And could you share the bases of your opinion before I ask you your ultimate opinion?
Sure. So based on the 130 slides you've seen, based on my personal inspection of the Lexus, the correlation of the tech stream data with the infotainment data, as well as Mr. O'Keefe's cell phone data, it's looking at, where the taillight wasn't broken. It's looking at the physical evidence at the scene in terms of taillight fragments, glass fragments, red color in the snow. We have the cell phone data, the location and position of the arm lacerations, the air temperature at the time indicative of sufficient to freeze, the location of the fracture on the back of his head relative to the scientific literature, my testing of forces available falling onto a hard surface, published science on the fracture forces associated with falls. I've inspected the Lexus. I've looked at where it wasn't damaged. I've inspected the taillight. I got an exemplar Lexus. I ran lower speed contacts to verify that the injury pattern and location on the arm is consistent with the height and orientation of the taillight. I have looked at fracture tolerance data for falling backwards onto hard surfaces. I've looked at the metrics of where his injuries were and what injuries he didn't sustain. I've looked at the cell phone data, and then I've looked at Miss Reed's interviews as well.
Based on all the evidence you considered, could you share with the jury what your opinion is to a reasonable degree of engineering certainty about whether the defendant's Lexus struck Mr. O'Keefe on January 29, 2022, around 12:32 a.m.?
Objection, Your Honor.
Go to the
I can answer. Yes, based on the totality of the evidence, DNA, everything I've talked about, that is consistent with that happening with a reasonable degree of scientific certainty. That is what happened.
Objection. Move to strike, Your Honor.
So I'm going to strike that. I'm going to see counsel's evidence.
To admit repeatedly towards the end of the day, when asked to summarize what led him to come to his opinion, and the first words out of his mouth were Karen's interviews, that's not science.